Next up we have Mike Ilett, again someone who I'm sure many of you will know. By way of introduction, Mike was born in Hertford, birded in Hertfordshire since his teens. He was previously the county bird recorder and has been the chairman of the Herts Rarity Panel since 2011 and was a co-author of the Birds of Hertfordshire. And Mike's going to give us an update, the Birds of Hertfordshire 10 years on. So, yeah, please welcome Mike.
Everyone hear me okay? Yep. Not sure it's working, yeah? Right, so Birds of Hertfordshire 10 years on, so it's not quite true. The book was actually published in 2015, but actually the data we used in it was up to 2013. So we thought it was a fair time, 10 years, God knows where those years have gone, but it's a good time just to review what's increased, what's decreased, and some of the more interesting species that have turned up over that time. Covered that. So for those who don't know, Birds of Hertfordshire, the one in the middle, still a few copies, even 10 years on to sell. So first of all, increasing species. So look, I've taken a bit of a view. I've just picked out some of the things that I think are more interesting. It's not covering every species that's increased or every species that decreased, but just some of the ones that I think are a bit more interesting from a trends perspective. So the first one I've got there is great white egret. So if you think that the first record in Hertfordshire of great white egret was as recently as 2001, and in the sort of the 9 years up until the Atlas, there had been a further, about 6-7 records. So I'm sure most people in here now, anyone who visits wetlands know that great white egret has increased massively. So I've got an exceptional increase in records. In 2013, number of records increased to 17, and by 2021, the number of records become so numerous it becomes almost difficult to differentiate between all the birds moving around. And then just to give you a bit of an indication there, so there's been flocks of great white egrets now. So 2 was a good count a few years ago, but now as recently as 21 we had 5 birds together at Amwell, and there was 9 birds went over Royston, and also 7 birds at Maple Cross. So that just gives you an indication of a bird that was first recorded in 2001, the massive expansion of that species into the county, and that's a national trend. It breeds in the UK now. The Somerset Levels, there's a big breeding population there, and it breeds in other areas of the county. So it's one probably to watch. Will it follow little egret and become a breeding species in Hertfordshire? I think nesting habitat it requires is slightly different. It's not like little egret that tends to nest in trees, they tend to nest in the reed beds and that, but who knows, somewhere like Tring reservoirs or something like that. And then cattle egret, I think there's a bit of a trend here, sort of the water birds, the herons and that are doing really well. So again, first recorded in Hertfordshire in 1992, at Stockers Lake, of all places. But by 2012, we'd only had 1 further record. In fact, the flock that turned up at Stockers Lake was actually the largest flock recorded in the UK up until that date, which is quite interesting. But again, in the last few years, you can see there's been a marked increase in records. So 2019, there's an increase, a total of 6 records of 14 birds, including 2 together at Chesham. Then 2020, further 8 records, again including 2 together at Amwell. 21, 6 records, 1 that stayed for 10 weeks at Purwell Meadows. Anyone who went to see that bird, it was an amazingly tame bird, and you could get within sort of 6-7 feet of it. And then 2022, minimum of 7 records of 10 birds, including 3 together. So, and these birds have been seen during the breeding season as well. So again, is this a species that's going to become a breeding species in Hertfordshire? It'll be an interesting one to watch out. And then white stork, a bit of a strange one. So in Hertfordshire, the first accepted wild white stork was 1984. And then we had about 18 further records by 2012. Now, there was always suspicions around escapes on white storks, and obviously there's now an introduction scheme in the south of the country. And so, you know, although the records are increasing, most of the records that we've seen, they haven't been ringed or anything like that. So they're suspected that they possibly are wild birds. In fact, there was 2 juveniles that were recording over the Tring area, which were obviously probably quite a good record. But, you know, not massively increased as the cattle egret and the great white egret. But again, you can see there's definitely a trend of regular occurrence now in the county. And then peregrine. So if you looked at the previous previous atlases, so the 67, 73, there was no tetrads where peregrines were present in the breeding season. 88, 92, no tetrads where they were present in the breeding season. And then in 2008 and 12, they were present in 5 tetrads. Now, these were always on the list of birds that we suspected would breed. Obviously, the population in London has increased quite significantly, and it was a natural thing that they would move out and just finding the right habitat. But we had to wait until 2017 before breeding was actually confirmed. And in that year, we actually had 2 pairs bred. So there was a pair near Hitchin and a pair in Watford. And then both of them, I think, yeah, both of them fledged too young. So, you know, first breeding, and it was quite successful as well. And as you can see, in the following years, we had a pair but no young were fledged in 2018, then 2 pairs with 6 young, 3 pairs with 9 young, 4 pairs with 8 young. So, you know, a bird that's definitely increasing. Barry will know. How many pairs do we think there are now? Is it 5, Barry?
There's 8 pairs.
8 pairs.
But they're not all breeding.
Right.
They're just hanging around churches, and 11 young last year, 2022.
Yeah. So you can see there's a real increase in the number of breeding pairs, which is great news. And this is also reflected in the winter record. So you wouldn't believe this, 2001, there was 1 record of peregrine in Hertfordshire. 1 record in the whole of winter. In 2021, there's 600 records from 100 sites. So I would say they're doing pretty well in Hertfordshire. A massive increase. And then Mediterranean gull. Like I say, this is a bit random. These are just things that interest me really that I pulled out. So again, first record in Hertfordshire was actually 1982. You know, this is a bird that we probably take for granted. It's not common in Hertfordshire, but certainly it's, you know, regularly seen in Hertfordshire. And then very small numbers recorded up until 1994. And then by the Atlas there was about 35 records a year, so, you know, a significant increase. And just to put it into perspective now, there's it's recorded every single month of the year from 13 locations with a maximum count of 3 birds at Hillfield and a peak of 5 birds in 2020. So I think the key bit there is it's actually recorded in every month of the year now. I think this is going to be a bird that's probably going to attempt to breed in Hertfordshire. The black-headed gull colonies are increasing significantly, places like Ryemeads and Amwell, for example. There's big black-headed gull colonies now, and these med gulls are frequently turning up now in these colonies. There was one, I think it was last year, there was a summer plumage bird at Amwell that was in with the black-headed gulls. So, you know, watch out, this could be a species that will breed quite soon. Ringneck parakeet, wow. So interestingly, Gladwin Sage, which was published in 1986, listed 12 records of ringneck parakeet, so quite a rarity in those days. And until 1982, but this had increased significantly by 2012. So when we did the Birds of Hertfordshire, there was 428 records with a maximum group size of 70. So, you know, you'd say significant increase in ringneck parakeets. However, if you look at 2020, 2,669 records from 240 sites with the largest flock of 928 birds at Stanborough Lake and 1,265 at Coulsers Road. And then 2021 increased even more. So 3,436 records from 272 sites. And the largest flock, 1,114, again at Stanborough Lake. So for a bird that there was only 12 records up until 1982, you can see that massive expansion in the county. Now, some people will say it's a good thing, some people will say it's a bad thing. Obviously, there's a lot of damage associated with parakeets. But it just shows you that not every bird is on the decrease, and some birds are doing really, really well. And then raven. So raven was historically a common breeding bird in Hertfordshire, going back 160 years, but was last recorded nesting in 1846 at Rocket Park. And then it became quite a rare bird. There was a few claims in the sort of 80s and 90s, but then, so there was only 14 records of raven up until 1999. And then breeding was approved for the first time in 160 years when a pair fledged 4 young at Whitwell. So that was quite amazing, because at that time raven was still quite a rare bird, but you know, we managed to have this nest and we proved breeding. Then the number of records have increased steadily over the last 5 years. So if you look at 2017, 332 records. So these are pure record submissions, so they could be repeat birds, etc. But it just gives you a bit of an indication about how the frequency that they're actually being seen by people. So 2017, 332, 2020, 636, 2021, 792. So these birds are on the increase. I think the one thing I would say is proving breeding is probably not very well covered. So we know there's, I think, was it 2021, there was, 2020 there was 6 sites which had 13 young. So these are sites that have been monitored and people have seen the young fledged. But I suspect the breeding population of raven in Hertfordshire is at least double that, maybe 3 times that, if people went out and looked, because they do occur in quite random places that you only find when you just suddenly go to somewhere and then a pair of raven fly over. You start watching them and you can work out actually quite easily whether they're breeding or not. So I suggest people go out, listen out for ravens and just watch them over a few days and see what they do, because they're not a hard bird to actually prove that they're breeding if you just watch them for a little while. And then yellow-browed warbler, so a vagrant, just to mix it up a bit. So this was first recorded in 1988 in the county, with 3 further records by 2010. So quite a rare vagrant to Hertfordshire. But this has continued to increase in records since 2012. So 2014 there was 2 birds at Amwell, which was quite amazing. Definitely two different birds, one at the top of the pit, one at the bottom of the pit, being watched at the same time. And then 2016, one at Anstey. 17, one in Green, 2018, 2 records, one at Willstone, one at Tring, and 2019, 6 records. So you can see over the last sort of, well, less than a decade, this has become not quite annual, but is much more regular occurring. And 2019, 6 records, quite amazing. It's a bird that can turn up in the autumn and sing in the autumn, or it can turn up in the winter, and they tend, if it's a mild winter, they will tend to winter. So again, just a bird worth keeping an eye out. Normally heard before you see them, but a thing that's worth considering. And actually, I've got a couple of interesting ones here. So lesser black-backed gulls. So this was really a passage migrant in Hertfordshire, summer, a spring-autumn migrant. And then birds started building up in the winter. If you go up North Herts now, you can see huge flocks up there, certainly during the passage times. But they've basically started nesting on rooftops. And I think Murray mentioned it earlier about trying to monitor gulls, and I think this species and herring gull, which I've got afterwards, it's quite a difficult one to prove, because they do tend to nest on top of industrial buildings and that, and you only tend to know if they're bred when there's some young wandering around and people see them. But in the 2008-12 Atlas, there was 8 proven pairs with a maximum 28 young, and then by 2018 there was actually nesting at 6 sites with a minimum of 26 pairs. So although the numbers have not gone up, there's a bit of a spread. They are actually still probably centred down there. So I think that's the 2008-12 Atlas there, which shows them in the south of the county. So around sort of Hoddesdon, around Watford way, they're the real strongholds where they're breeding. Again, I think it's one of those birds that if people went out, spent a bit of time watching, they'd actually be able to prove a lot more breeding pairs. And very similar story with herring gull. This is a bird that, again, was generally a winter visitor, but now has taken up nesting on rooftops. 2019, 5 sites with a minimum of 14 pairs. and then 2021 was at 2 sites with 16 pairs. But I've just made a note there that the key Watford site wasn't actually recorded for that year, so again, the increase would probably be quite significant because Watford is a real key site for this species. So yeah, a couple of gull species that are obviously doing quite well in the county. And then decreasing species. So I think a lot of the species on this list, you know, is something that's been going on for a while and we all know all about. But I think it's just interesting to put it in perspective of when we did the last atlas in 2012. Have these birds continued to decrease? Is there still pressure on them? So spotted flycatcher. The top graph there is the 88-92 survey. It was basically present in 378 tetrads during the breeding season. By 2008 and 2012, which is the lower graph, it was only present in 129 tetrads, of which proven breeding was in 51 tetrads. So as recently as 2012, there was 51 tetrads where spotted flycatchers were still breeding. So unfortunately, it would look like the decline is going ahead. Now, there's a bit of a watch out here because during the atlas period, we're intensely monitoring those areas, looking for all the birds in there. So the records I've got there for 19, 20, 21 are purely records of proven breeding that have been submitted to the bird club and put on the website. So I think one thing I would say is, look, if you've got any of these declining species, it would be really great if you could submit the records. You don't have to put locations if you're worried about people turning up. You can put them all anonymously, but it'd be great for us to capture that data. So, you know, 2019, 10 pairs, only 5 proven. 2020, 11 pairs, and in 2021, only 5 pairs proven. And these are probably birds that have been regularly visited, so I know I go regularly up North Herts and the Wallington and Sandon and places like that, so that's probably where those pairs are. But I would, you know, if you have got any spotted flycatchers, come into your garden or you find some in a churchyard somewhere, look, just submit them to the website because it's really useful for when we do this kind of thing and looking at the data. And then finally enough, SMEW. Going to you, I thought you were going to steal my talk actually earlier on. So, funny enough, underlying pattern of this species is one of short stopping. Anyone I think we wrote these together. So as a result of milder winters, so as mentioned earlier, you know, the milder winters, these species, these Arctic species or Scandinavian species are not having to move as far. They can winter in Holland quite happily and we're not, all the lakes in Holland aren't freezing over and they're being pushed over. So, you know, in the mid-last century, so 1940s, 50s, 60s, there were still regular peaks of between 28 and 30 birds at main sites. And even as recently as, I think it's, I thought I put a date there, I haven't put a date there, but it was recent, I think it's about 1999, something like that. There were still counts of up to 26 birds at Amwell and 18 at Stockers Lake. So we're only talking about sort of, you know, 20 years ago there was still big numbers of these species occurring. But in recent years there's been a marked decline in the peak counts due to the milder winters. So this is not necessarily about SMEW declining as a species, this is more about SMEW declining as a species which is turning up here because it doesn't need to. So, you know, 2015, peak of 5 at Amwell, 4 at Cheshunt Gravel Pits. Then if you go down, 2020, there was only singles at 3 sites in Hertfordshire. So 1 bird, probably 1 at Amwell, 1 at Stockers and maybe 1 at Willstone Reservoir. And then in 2023, in the first winter period, there was a single flyover at Willstone and the male at Stockers Lake. That's the only records for the first winter period of 2023. So basically, 1 bird in the whole county now. So from a species which you could regularly see in double figures, this is a significant decline. But, you know, the question is it a decline because of pressure on the birds or is it just that they're not needing to turn up? And then black-necked grebe. So, you know, this first bred at Hillfield Park Reservoir in 1990, when a pair fledged 4 young, but it wasn't repeated again until 1998 when they then started regularly breeding again. So over the last decade, breeding at Hillfield peaked at 7 broods in 2015, but in 2020 there was no evidence of breeding, and 2021 1 nest failed, so They attempted to nest in 21, nest failed. I haven't got any more recent data, but I can't imagine there's been suddenly a big increase in these birds. So the table below there is just to give you an idea of the maximum number of adults that are turning up, how many nesting attempts, and the number of young. It's quite hard pulling all this data out of the bird reports, but it's just to give you a bit of an indication. So 2012, 14, 15, we're talking about 25, 24 adults turning up during the spring and remaining. And then nesting attempts, okay, 2014 was a poor year, but basically 2012, 2015, there was 6 or 7 nesting attempts. 2015 being a really good year with 13 young coming off. But then if you go down to 2019, the numbers of birds actually turning up have started to decline. And then you look at 2021, this has dropped right off to only 8 birds turning up during the spring and summer. And then this is only reflected in the 1 nesting attempt with no young being fledged. So, look, again, this is a bird that there's probably not a lot to do. Black-necked grebes are a funny species. They do have a tendency to start breeding in an area. They might breed there for 4 or 5 years and then actually just move for no apparent reason. Everything looks exactly the same. But they do have this tendency to move around different areas. And in fact, you know, they've been breeding there now since, well, regularly 98. So actually 20 odd years is 25 years is actually quite a long time for black-necked grebes to be loyal to one site. So who knows, whether it might be the end of black-necked grebes breeding at Hillfield, or suddenly we might have a good year and we might have really good numbers again. And then turtle dove. I think everyone knows about the story with turtle dove. So the 67 to 73 Atlas, it was present in 444 tetrads during the breeding season, and it was proved to breed in 149 tetrads. By the time we did the 2008-12 Atlas, which is in the Birds of Hertfordshire, it was only present in 62 tetrads, and there was no proven breeding at all. What I tried to do at the bottom there is just pull together sort of some of the more recent numbers. So the number of records is actually the total number of records submitted to the website. So this is not the number of birds. There could be 2 birds that have been recorded 40 times each. And then at the bottom line there is just what the breeding success or evidence was. So if you look at 2009, there was 84 submissions of turtle doves occurring in Hertfordshire. By 2016, there was only 10 records. This is the total number of records submitted to the website. And by 2021, 4 records. So 4 records of turtle dove in the whole county during the summer. Amazing. Breeding evidence. So the last time they probably bred in Hertfordshire was 2014, when there was a pair. I think it was a male actually, was seen with 2 young. So the possibility is they may have bred in the county. The nest wasn't seen, but the suspicion is that they probably did nest quite locally. 2014, so that was the last time they bred in Hertfordshire. 2015, there was a pair on territory, nothing happened. 2018, 1 male was heard singing, nothing happened. In 2020, 1 male was singing during the breeding season, nothing happened. All the red ones there was no evidence of breeding, i.e. actually no birds present during the breeding season. So not that they weren't purring or nest building, there were actually no birds present. There's it not working again. You buy those cheap batteries again, don't
Is that going? Yeah.
Hello? Sorry about that. So lesser spotted woodpecker, again another bird that everyone knows has been in quite significant decline, but again when you look at the most recent data, so 88-92 it was present in 177 tetrads, proved to be breeding in 27. In 2008 and 12 by the Atlas, it was present in 49 and proven to breed in only 5 tetrads. So what I've done there in the bottom there is a bit of a chart of all the sites where birds were recorded during the breeding season, so potential breeding sites, and then what the actual breeding success or evidence was. So If you look at 2013, they were present in 11 sites during the breeding season. So this is like, I don't know, April, May time. And then, but that year there was no evidence. Then 2015, 2016, they were present at 13 sites. So a little bit of an increase in that year, and actually that was reflected in a pair bred and raised 2 young in both of those years, which is great. However, since 2018, so you can see there that only 3 sites had birds during the breeding season. There was a nest excavated at one of those sites, but it failed. And then since 2019, there's been no breeding evidence at all, and the numbers are sort of fluctuate between 5, 6 and 3 sites where the birds were present. So, you know, a bird that's in serious decline and, you know, almost certainly extinct as a breeding species. Hopefully there's a pair somewhere, hidden away in a little woodland, but, you know, it is right on the verge of extinction. And then long-eared owl. So, you know, this is a bird that has bred in the county. So, for example, in the 67-73, there was 5, it was proved to be breeding in 5 tetrads. Likewise, in the following atlas, there were again 5. And then 2008 and 12, it was proved to be breeding in 1 tetrad. However, this is pretty much gone as a breeding species now. So last proved to be breeding in 96 and 2009, and it's now really just a rare and decreasing winter visitor. Between 2012 and 18, it was up to 4 birds regularly roosting in the north of the county. So this was a regular roost site up near Royston, but unfortunately over the last few years they've now declined from there, and it hasn't been recorded there since 2019. And in fact, the only year was a single bird in 2021 which was seen in the east of the county. So not only is this gone as a breeding species in the county, it's actually pretty much disappeared as a wintering species in the county. Now, I'm sure a number of people remember back in the day in the Lee Valley on the Herts, Essex border, when there was good numbers roosting down there. So this is a bird that's sort of significantly declined in Hertfordshire from both breeding and wintering species. And then tree sparrows, again, we touched on this earlier. So, you know, when I was younger, I can remember tree sparrows in the garden coming to the bird feeders. I can remember flocks of 100 about half a mile from the house in the fields. So this was a common bird. You could find them breeding anywhere with holes in trees without tree sparrows nesting in them. So 67, 73, not quite that old. It was present in 445 tetrads during the breeding season, and it proved to breed at 269. By the 2012, it was only proved to breed in 4 tetrads and not present in any other tetrads other than those 4. And they're probably 4 tetrads which circle around Titnanger, if the truth be known. So basically one site just happens to cover 4 tetrads, I think, probably right, Ripper. So it's a well-documented decline, and that's through the whole of the south of England. In fact, I think the Titnanger birds were probably the last breeding birds in southeast England. They used to be a small colony at Bennington, and they disappeared earlier. So again, what I've tried to do is look at more recent years and just around the success of the species. So if you look at the blue squares, that's number of eggs laid. The green is the number of young that were fledged, and the bottom one, the yellow one, is the number of nests. So actually the number of nests is fairly consistent, but around about between 11 and 20 nests. But it's all around how successful they are at actually bringing off young. So if you look at 2019, 69 young fledged from 23 nests. But in 2014, there was 25 nests, but only, 11 nests and only 25 young fledged. So I think the fledging success is partly the issue with the species. It's up and down. 2019 was obviously a real bumper year for them. And actually, if you looked at that, you would have thought, actually, they're on the up and they're doing really well. However, by the time we got 2020 and 21, there was 8 and 7 nests, and fledged young was down from 26 in 2020 and 14 in 2021. Now, as we touched on earlier, there's no tree sparrows at Tittenhanger anymore. So I thought the last record was February, but you say it's March last year?
Yeah, March. It might have even been early April, but yeah.
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 So there's been no records of tree sparrows at Tittenhanger since March last year, so a year ago now. And so the chances are they're extinct as a breeding species in Hertfordshire, and actually they are a very rare species overall. I mean, they occasionally turn up during the winter in other areas, but I think we've always been reliant on seeing these birds at Tittenhanger, but it certainly looks like they've now gone. And then little ring plover. So a lot of this is down to success with fledging, really. If you look at the numbers on the bottom there, I mean, it looks quite good. 2020, 21, 11 and 8 birds. But when you start looking at the data, these are from like 1 or 2 sites. I think the big issue here is that you've probably got a number of pairs now at just a couple of sites. The Stanbrook Gravel Pits has got a relatively large number of little-winged plovers that have been fairly successful. So this is a bird that's really struggling. The birds at Amwell tend to be predated every year. I don't think there's been a successful pair there for quite a few years now, even though they attempt to breed every year. And then tree pipit, again, this is one which is just in total decline. So from a species that was proven to breed in 46 tetrads in the 60s, 70s, it's now down to a passage migrant of 6 records a year. So massive decline in that species. And we touched on woodcock as well. So again, a bird that was recorded in 106 tetrads during the breeding season in 67, down to 12 tetrads in 2012. And actually, I don't think it's been recorded during the breeding season. So the survey on woodcock should be an interesting one, is probably what I'd say. So I had a 5-minute warning, so I'm speeding up a little bit. Corn bunting. Now, corn bunting, obviously, massive decline. Now, really, in the north of the county, I would say north of the county, really holding its own. There's plenty of birds up there. If you go around the Wallington, Baldock, Royston areas, lots of corn buntings up in the North County, but obviously the range has really reduced up to that north of the county. So I don't think there's much of a decline up there. I think they're fairly stable. There's some big wintering flocks up there as well. What I would say is, though, the Marsworth roost, which has always been a roost that's been monitored over and over the years of counting the number of birds coming in. So if you look in 2013, there was 200 corn buntings coming into roost there. In 2021, 8 birds. So massive decline in the west of the county of corn bunting. What I did do was a bit of a sort of summary of some of the more unusual species that occurred over the last sort of 10 years. I'll whip through it. So glossy ibis, this was only the 2nd record since 1987. Spoonbill is a species that's increased dramatically in Hertfordshire with a number of records over the last few years, and actually this flock of 15 birds that occurred at Wheelstone Reservoir, which was unbelievable. This is a species that's increasing massively in the UK and now obviously breeding in the Norfolk coast, so you'd expect there to be more records. Storm petrel, one at Spellbrook, was only the 8th record. Rough-legged buzzard, there's been a few records of rough-legged buzzard. And then roseate tern, first record for 46 years at Amwell in 2015. Amazingly, 2016, another one turned up at Wheelstone Reservoir, so a bit like Buster's. Kentish plover was the first record in 2017 and was only the 4th record and the first since 1976. And then bee-eaters was one of the big stories. So a flock of 3 bee-eaters was found at Bayford. Next day there was actually 7 birds present, and these were obviously the birds that had attempted to breed in Nottinghamshire, and they were on their migration the way back and just stopped off at Hertfordshire for 2 days, which was great. And then blue throat died at Amwell. And I'll just whiz through these because I just want to get on to the next bit. So when I did the Birds of Hertfordshire in 2015, I made 3 predictions of what would be the next first birds in Hertfordshire. So this is the slide, so I'm not cheating. So Pendulum Tit, Ring-billed Gull and Pallid Harrier. So good news is I've got 2 out of the 3 right. So since 2012 there's been 5 new species occurred in Hertfordshire. So Bonaparte Skull at Wheelstone Reservoir, which is that one. Franklin's Gull at Amble, which is not quite as obliging as it was only present for 22 minutes. And then 3 parrot crossbills, which were quite obliging because they stayed for a couple of months in Broxbourne Woods. And then my 2 predictions, so Pallid Harrier, it's a bird that's increasing significantly in the UK, and it was only a matter of time till we got one really. Bearing in mind how good north of the county is for raptors. So Pallid Harrier found on the 18th of September, stayed around for a month or so, and gave some amazing views for anyone who went up there to see it. And then the last one was Pendulum Tit, which turned up at Titnanger on the 16th and was there very briefly on the 17th. So I got 2 out of 3 predictions right anyway. I haven't made any predictions going forward, but I'll stick with Ring-billed Gull. That's got to occur at some point, even though it's sort of declining in the UK. But that's me.